Good afternoon, everyone. And the first item of business today is portfolio questions. And in order to get as many people in as possible, I'd prefer short and succinct questions and answers, please. And the first question is Jean Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what role Police Scotland play in community planning partnerships.
Minister, Cabinet Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
Police Scotland is a key partner in all 32 community planning partnerships. Local policing is the bedrock of the new service, and the Chief Constable has a statutory duty to participate in community planning. This function is delegated to local commanders who, working closely with local partners, are responsible for developing and delivering local policing plans which contribute directly to the local outcomes identified through community planning.
Jean Urquhart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. The public have rightly been outraged by the actions of the Metropolitan Police, who removed sleeping bags, food and other personal belongings from homeless people in London, and justify those acts by saying the public rely on police to reduce the negative impact of rough sleepers. What assurances can the Scottish Government give that Scotland's justice system will not follow the Metropolitan Police's callous approach and rather work with other public sector partners to address issues around homelessness in a constructive and humane manner?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think this is yet again a tale of two jurisdictions. Whether it's police numbers rising here while they're plummeting south of the border, it's again a circumstance where matters are dealt with differently. I can give the member the assurance that these are not the values or ethos that Police Scotland seeks to, has ever in the past conducted, nor would they in the future. That comes from meetings I have had with the Chief Constable earlier this week, a meeting I've had this morning with the Police Investigation and Review Commissioners, and indeed, no doubt it will be echoed when I meet later today with both George Graham, HM Inspector of Constabulary, and Callum Steele, the General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation. That is not how we treat rough sleepers or those who are homeless in Scotland, whether as a government or whether as a police service.
Thank you very much. Question 2, Jim Hume.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it will safeguard local access to the justice system in rural areas.
Secretary Kenny MacAskill.
The recommendations in the Scottish Court Service consultations shaping Scotland's court services were drawn up in the light of the principles for provision of access to justice agreed among the Lord President, the Lord Justice Clerk and the Sheriff's Principal. These included the principle that the Scottish Court Services should ensure that most people will be able to travel to their local court by public transport so as to arrive at the start of the case in which they are concerned and be able to return home by public transport on the same day. That local court should, as a minimum, be able to hear and determine summary criminal cases and lower value or more straightforward civil matters. The recommendations on future court structures adhere to this principle, and local access to justice in rural areas will thus be safeguarded.
Jim Hume.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for those words, but the Cabinet Secretary stated that the people in Peebles are entitled to a court on their doorstep, and we need to recognise the importance to the community of retaining the Sheriff Court in Peebles. That was the Cabinet Secretary's own words from 2002. In my region, 4 courts are earmarked for closure: Haddington, Duns, Kirkcudbright and Peebles. And the removal of these courts will present particular transport challenges to my constituents. Is it not time the Cabinet Secretary admitted that the Government has got it badly wrong, stands by his own words of 2002 and pledges today to protect our valuable local courts and also put the SNP members of the Justice Committee out of their misery?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, those were my words in 2002, but the world moves on, and I have to look at the business volume for Peebles in 2012, where the average weekly trial was 0.1, because in 2012 there were 7 trials, summary level, in which evidence was led. 7 in a year. There were 5 proofs in which evidence was led in a year. So there comes a time where, as we have seen south of the border, as we have quotes from UK ministers who share the same party affiliation as Mr Hume, matters have to go on. No doubt he will be making similar matters concerning the closure of courts in Alnwick, in Cockermouth and indeed in Penrith, that his party is inflicting south of the border much more than we are requiring to close here, and our closures are coming about because of the financial cuts imposed by his colleagues down in London.
Claire Baker.
Rod Campbell MSP told the Courier, to people in North East Fife, local justice means attending court in North East Fife, not Dundee. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with these remarks, particularly as by moving business from Cooper to Dundee, business will be moved from the Fife and Forth Valley Community Justice area into an entirely separate local authority area, which has huge implications for managing offenders?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Rod Campbell is an outstanding constituency MSP. He has met with me and put forward the position correctly as he sees it on behalf of his constituents. Equally, I have to take on board the view and the position put forward by the Lord President, our most senior judge, and his staff led by the Chief Executive of the Scottish Court Service. These matters do occur in many instances where people require to go back to the area having been dealt with in a court that is in a different aspect or CGA. That happens routinely, and members in Ms Baker's party will confirm the situation in Glasgow when people come in from Rutherglen or other aspects. These matters are perfectly capable of being dealt with, not simply by the good offices of the Scottish Court Service, but also by the local authorities and the ADSW, who are those challenged with dealing with these particular aspects.
Mary Scanlon.
Will the Cabinet Secretary review resources in rural areas for wildlife crime to ensure that species such as the freshwater pearl mussel are given far better protection than they are at the present time?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to say that I'm meeting with Detective Chief Constable Rose Fitzpatrick tomorrow, who's in charge of local policing in Scotland. I'll be happy to raise that matter with her and to get back to Mary Scanlon on it. I don't have the particular briefing to hand, but I'll be happy, as I say, to ensure I feed back that matter.
Finally, Christine Graham, briefly, please.
Very briefly, thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Is the Cabinet Secretary aware that in 2002 the Labour Liberal Executive were hell-bent on closing Peebles Sheriff Court? And these were in the good times before Dali Alexander got his hands on the purse strings.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, absolutely. It's not just selective memory, it's also myopia when they refuse to look at what they're doing south of the border.
Thank you. Question 3, Chick Brodie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what considerations informed the Scottish Court Service's review of court services.
The context of the court service consultation in shaping Scotland's court services is that the network of courts which we've inherited reflects more the social and economic needs of the Victorian age. Many courthouses date from those times, and the facilities do not always fully meet the standards expected of a modern court. The court service is not, moreover, immune from the financial constraints imposed by the Westminster Government and the challenges that they require to meet as we move to providing a modern system within a reduced budget. So against the backdrop of unprecedented cuts to the Scottish budget from Westminster, it is seeking to save £4.5 million from its revenue budget and £6.4 million from its capital budget in the period 11-12 to 14-15. And as I say, I fully understand and sympathise with the challenges faced by the Lord President. These are forced upon us because we are not in charge of our own financial destiny.
Thank you. Chick Brodie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As he will know, an independent forensic accountancy analysis was carried out by those against the closure of Haddington Court. This has caused some confusion as to the reliability of figures produced by both sets of protagonists. Will the Cabinet Secretary request that both sides sit down, even now, together to validate the detail of their analyses so that the decision to close the court is substantiated on the basis of the facts?
Well, this is fundamentally a matter for the Scottish Court Service. This Parliament unanimously passed the Judiciary Act, and it is the Lord President who is in charge of the Scottish Court Service, and it's separate from government. However, I can see no reason for such a meeting. As I mentioned yesterday in committee, I do not believe that the headline figure put forward in the forensic report deals with matters appropriately. There are matters that are being dealt with in Edinburgh where costs will remain the same and will not increase. So this is a matter in which I have full confidence in the position taken by the Lord President and by the Scottish Court Service.
Thank you. Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What consideration did the Cabinet Secretary give to the safety of victims and witnesses travelling together with the accused to court? This was highlighted by Ross-shire Women's Aid, in particular with concern to people suffering from domestic abuse. What steps will he take to ensure their safety?
Well, this matter is given the highest regard, not simply by the Government and the Court Service, but in particular by the Crown, who are responsible for the citation, certainly of Crown witnesses, and also by Police Scotland. This is a matter that has been raised with me, both in committee and indeed privately by John Finney. I'm aware of the views and concerns of Ross-shire Women's Aid. They are right and understandable to raise these matters. But as of his position put forward by the Court Service, we can give an assurance that the Scottish Police and indeed the Crown will take all these matters into account. These are circumstances and challenges that are faced everywhere in Scotland, not always simply in rural matters, but quite often in peripheral housing schemes that exist in urban Scotland. They are treated most seriously, will be protected and provided for by the Crown and by Police Scotland.
Many thanks. Question 4, Margaret MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will use the criminal justice system to establish whether people have been transported illegally through Scottish airports and discourage it from happening again.
Lord Advocate.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The use of torture cannot be condoned. It is against international law and contrary to the common law of Scotland. As the member will be aware, a police inquiry was conducted into allegations of extraordinary rendition at Scottish airports in 2007-2008. Following the inquiry, the police concluded that there was insufficient credible and reliable information to enable them to commence a criminal investigation. I am aware of the information provided by the rendition project by researchers at Kent and Kingston universities. I consider that this information and any other information additional to that considered by the police in 2007 should be the subject of police consideration. I will thereafter ask Police Scotland to give consideration to this information.
Margaret MacDonald.
I thank the Lord Advocate for his full reply. It's a better quality of reply than we've had in this matter up until now. But as he's aware of the recent research, he will realise that it is persistent allegation that flights did come through Scotland. And so can I ask him not to dilly-dally and wait for someone to tell him that there should be an inquiry, because the evidence is there in front of his eyes. And the will is there too, I would imagine, from this government, because the present minister said in I think 2007, it comes down to political will. Fundamentally, that is what is lacking from the executive. The government and the Scottish executive must stand up for the values to which the people of Scotland adhere and must maintain the laws that we have held dear for centuries. I appreciate that is not in the Lord Advocate's domain, but perhaps he could tell the Minister that that's what we all believe.
Thank you. Lord Advocate.
Well, I thank Margaret MacDonald for a supplementary question. It's very important that there should be no dilly-dallying in this matter. The police, I'm confident that the police will conduct a thorough inquiry, which is always very important in these matters. But what I should say, and it should be recognised, that in order for criminal proceedings to be raised, it must be proved that a crime known to the law of Scotland has been committed, that an identified individual or individuals have committed or aided and abetted that crime within this jurisdiction, that the individuals have the necessary mens rea, that's knowledge and intent, that their actions are furthering the commission of the crime. And I make the point, a very important point, that speculation, conjecture, innuendo and belief are insufficient. What you need is hard evidence, sufficient evidence to the requisite high standard of proof is required. But I'm confident that the police will do their duty in this matter and will conduct a thorough inquiry in accordance with the principles of Police Scotland.
Many thanks. Question 5, Alex Johnston.
To ask the Scottish Government what measures it is taking to ensure that court fines and police antisocial behaviour penalties are collected.
Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
Since Scottish Court Service took over responsibility in 2008, overall collection of fines and penalties have improved considerably and are now at consistently high levels. In some cases, people who are finding it difficult to pay their fine can agree an alternative repayment plan with the fines enforcement officers. For people who decide not to pay, enhanced tracing facilities are making it easier to track them down and apply the full range of enforcement actions, including deducting benefits, freezing bank accounts, arresting wages and seizing cars. Sheriff officers are also helping to target persistent defaulters who ignore payment demands. Ultimately, fine defaulters can be brought before the courts to explain why they have not paid and receive an order of the court.
Alex Johnson.
I would like to take the opportunity to heap lavish praise on the Minister for his initiative earlier in the year in contacting the Department of Work and Pensions in order to ensure that there is a full and proper flow of information from the DWP to the Scottish Justice Department to ensure that collection of fines can be achieved. Would the Minister be in a position to tell me exactly how effective this close working relationship with Ian Duncan-Smith has been and how many fines have been collected as a direct result?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not able to give precise details. It would be fair to say that we were communicating with Mr Duncan-Smith and indeed his predecessors for some time. I welcomed the fact that these powers and information are now available. I think these matters will be getting worked through between the DWP and the Scottish Court Service. A lot of it is about enabling the Court Service to obtain access to details, to information, to find out where they are, to obtain access to their employment data, their national insurance matters, so that they can find out where they're working, because that information was previously unable to be accessed easily by the Scottish Court Service. What I would be happy to do to the member is to either providing a briefing myself or to get a briefing from the Chief Executive of the Scottish Court Service as to where we're at, because, as I say, I think it's work in progress. The member's right to give credit to Ian Duncan-Smith. We are grateful for that, but I think we're at the start of a journey, but it is one that is very much welcomed by the Court Service.
Many thanks. Neil Findlay, please.
Does the Minister agree with me that, to avoid fines and penalties, those who aggressively act in an antisocial manner towards innocent bystanders should apologise, preferably in person, reflect upon their future behaviour and consider what impression it gives to those who are caught up in the antisocial act?
Secretary.
Well, I have a great deal of sympathy and support for restorative justice, but it isn't suitable for some witnesses who can be very vulnerable. I think these matters are best left to the police to exercise their discretion, and equally for the Crown to also exercise their discretion. Where it is appropriate, I think the member makes a valid point, and that can be of benefit both to the perpetrator and the victim. But I think we have to make sure that we leave those to the authorities charged with it for them to discuss with both the victim and the perpetrator.
Sandra White, briefly, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think the Cabinet Secretary is very much aware that half of the money collected in fines goes to the Treasury in London. In fact, in 2007, £113 million has went to the Treasury in London and not been contained here in Scotland. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that this money could go a long way in helping victims and also perpetrators of crime to bring them to justice if it was kept here in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, absolutely. I was gobsmacked yesterday to hear the Labour Justice spokesman say that the difficulties and financial challenges that the Scottish Court Service faced as a result of the cuts ultimately caused by the actions of the coalition government in Westminster could all be dealt with by better fine enforcement. If only that were the case, when the overwhelming majority of fine income goes directly to the Treasury, who are imposing these self-same cuts. So, as in some other aspects, I think people should be taking a long, hard look, or in fact considering that they get their information right.
Question 6, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support is on offer to help people with autism when engaging with the legal system.
Mr. Rosanna Cunningham.
The National Autism Society maintain a list of law firms who have experience of advising and representing people with autism, and people can search the database on the Society's website for legal services in their area. The Crown Office is committed to ensuring that the correct support is put in place for victims and witnesses, taking into account their individual needs. It has specific guidance on autism, a guide for criminal justice professionals produced by the National Autistic Society, and the guide to people with learning disabilities in the criminal justice system.
George Adam.
I thank the Minister for her answer. I'm aware of the work of the Law Society of Scotland to raise awareness of such conditions with their members. Can the Minister comment on any further help which is available?
Minister.
The guide to people with learning disabilities was produced in 2011 in collaboration with the Scottish Government, by the Scottish Government in collaboration with the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, ACPOS, the Scottish Court Service, Scottish Prison Service and NHS Scotland. And that basically provides information to people with learning disabilities in relation to the Scottish criminal justice system. But in addition, autism alert cards have been developed to provide and improve interactions and outcomes with members of emergency services and others. They can be carried by a person with autism and used in difficult situations where they may find communication difficult. They've been developed by the National Autistic Society and they've been launched in the Highlands, Lothian and Borders, Orkney, Shetland and Western Isles, Central Scotland and Strathclyde. And currently the ASD reference group have discussed a national implementation of the card and are considering how to roll them out nationally across all of Scotland. Recommendations will be made to my ministerial colleague Michael Matheson for his consideration later in this year.
Thank you very much. Dr Elaine Murray, question 7.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the Chief Constable regarding the number and location of control rooms required by Police Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
This is an operational matter and no discussions have taken place with the Chief Constable. I am, however, aware that Police Scotland is undertaking work to ensure that the Contact, Command and Control Division is as effective as possible in looking to provide the best service to communities.
Dr Murray.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. There are 45 civilian staff and 12 police officers in the control room in Dumfries. And could he possibly impress upon the Chief Constable the need to consult and communicate with those staff in advance of the final decision being made?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'll be happy to do that when I meet with senior officers tomorrow, but I can give the member the assurance that I did discuss this matter earlier this week with Unison when Jerry Crawley and other representatives of staff came to see me. I am aware of the concerns. There do have to be changes to ensure we get the appropriate protection for our communities, and I think it's accepted by all that 10 is no longer suitable or appropriate. What the final number will be and just what the locations are will be for Police Scotland and the union representatives.
Briefly, John McAlpine, please.
Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us how the new Police Scotland structure will help in the policing of common riding events across southern Scotland? And can he confirm my understanding that there is no charge for policing these community events?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, my understanding on this is that the police have participated greatly. They see the benefits to the community. Many of them live in the communities in which they serve. So I think you will find that Police Scotland will make no changes there. They are there to serve and not seek to operate as a business. That is always a matter we've made clear in Scotland.
Many thanks. And we now move to Rural Affairs and Environment questions. Question 1 has not been lodged and an explanation has been provided by Jenna Mara. Question 2, Colin Keir.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether consideration has been given to using a financial model for regional parks based on that used for national parks.
Mr Paul Wheelhouse.
Especially in this, the year of Natural Scotland, our 3 regional parks and 2 national parks have an important role to play in encouraging people to enjoy the outdoors. Our regional parks are important areas of countryside. In a regional context, they provide opportunities for outdoor recreation alongside farming and other land uses, and they are easy to reach from Scotland's urban areas. Our 2 national parks, on the other hand, have been designated by Parliament as areas of the highest national value for the landscape, wildlife and cultural heritage, and they are intentionally recognised, internationally recognised visitor destinations. The National Park Authorities are accountable to Scottish Ministers, and the collective management of the national parks contributes directly to the achievement of Scottish Government outcomes. The Government has no plans to use a financial model for regional parks based on that used for national parks, and I refer Mr Keir to an answer provided on 30th of January 2013, when I confirmed that the Government has no plans to redesignate regional parks as national parks.
Thank you. Colin Keir.
Thank you. Given financial pressures on local authorities to maintain and manage regional parks, would the Scottish Government consider investigating the possibility of a more sustainable form of management and financial governance with a view to easing pressure on local authorities and the park management teams?
Minister.
As I'm sure the member would acknowledge, the Scottish Government finances are also under pressure as a consequence of the UK Government spending decisions. I do sympathise with Colin Keir's clear desire to support the regional parks, but in 2013-14 the Scottish Government is providing local government in Scotland with over £10.3 billion of support. The vast majority of this funding, including the funding for regional parks, is being provided by means of a block grant, and following the Concordat SNH funding previously provided to local authorities in respect of regional parks is now rolled into that block grant. It is therefore now the responsibility of each local authority to allocate the total financial resources available to it on the basis of local needs and priorities, having first fulfilled its statutory obligations and the jointly agreed set of national and local priorities, including the Scottish Government's key strategic objectives.
Thank you. Question 3, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government how many of the country's protected sites are in favourable condition. How many?
Secretary Richard Lockhead.
78.1% of protected features in Scotland's designated nature sites are in favourable condition, as published on the Scotland Performs website on the 17th of May.
Mike Mackenzie.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. It's very encouraging to note that. Clearly, overgrazing and invasive species are the main challenges to conditions improving from unfavourable to favourable. and native or non-native invasive species can have a detrimental effect on important habitats, ultimately changing the ecology of the habitat. What action can the Scottish Government take to ensure the proportion of natural features in favourable conditions continues to rise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mike Mackenzie is quite right. The most significant causes of unfavourable condition are overgrazing by sheep and deer and invasive species such as various plant species. And as part of the Scotland Rural Development Programme, the member may be aware, we have a number of instruments that provide funding to land managers to try and tackle some of these particular issues. So the SRDP is certainly the major funding stream to help support keeping these sites in favourable condition and help their management. There's a range of legislation also in place in relation to non-native species and so on and so forth. So we do keep a close eye on this, but as the member welcomed, the trend is going in the right direction in terms of the number of sites in favourable condition, and we'll continue to try and push that trend upwards.
Thank you. Question 4, Kenny Gibson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the State of Nature report and the challenge it contains to prevent further loss of biodiversity.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
As I stated when I spoke at the Edinburgh launch, we welcome the State of Nature report, which provides a valuable contribution to our understanding of the environment. It is clear from the report that we have success stories to tell, such as Scotland being home to almost 60% of all known European species of mosses and liverworts, including the Scottish beard moss, a species found nowhere else on earth except the permanently wet rocks on the mountains of the western Scotland. The report also highlights warnings for us to heed, such as declines in 5 out of 12 of our seabird species. Our biodiversity is under threat from climate change, loss of habitats and change in land management practices. And we recognise the importance of protecting and enhancing our natural environment and are committed to working with our partners, including the environmental NGOs, to that end.
Kenny Gibson.
Thank the Minister for his reply. I've got a unique species in my own constituency, the catacall whitebeam in Isle of Arran. According to the State of Nature report, reasons for decline of animal and plant species are many and varied. Clearly, we all have a part to play in stemming the decline in Scotland's wildlife. What is the Scottish Government doing to encourage the public to take practical action to protect wildlife through conscientious gardening and land management?
Minister.
The Scottish Government is indeed keen to support individuals and communities to garden in ways that benefit biodiversity. And indeed, last week I visited Gardening Scotland, which is Scotland's biggest garden show with around 40,000 visitors to it. The Scottish Government supports a living garden area, and this year's garden was themed around the Year of Natural Scotland. Thanks to the hard work of Sheila Filsell and some of the students from Elmwood College, part of SRUC, not only did it win a silver medal, but it was very successful in attracting the show's visitors into the area where SNH and environmental charities had stalls and information ready to encourage them to undertake wildlife-friendly gardening. SNH also supports the Garden for Life Forum, which provides a variety of information with gardeners, and information is available on their website, www.gardenforlife.org.uk.
Jamie McGregor, briefly, please.
The report highlights the decline in seabird species, like the Arctic skua nesting in Scotland. What specific action can ministers take on seabirds?
Minister.
As the member is aware, we are looking specifically in terms of the MPA network to cover the area providing sand eels to seabird populations. There are difficulties, as I'm sure he is aware, in trying to pinpoint areas which would specifically benefit specific species of seabirds. We are trying to look after black guillemots, for example, but also protecting the habitats which provide habitats for sand eels, which are a key food source for our seabirds.
5, John Finney.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the work of the Land Reform Review Group.
Minister Paul.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Land Reform Review Group's interim report was given to ministers on 10th of May and published on 20th of May, concluding phase 1 of their work. As phase 2 planning meeting was held on the 28th of May, which identified a range of work streams to take forward in phase 2. The review group is due to make its final report to ministers in April 2014 at the end of phase 3. The chair of the review group, Alison Elliott, will also be speaking to the Rural Affairs, Climate Change and Environment Committee on 26th of June.
John Finney.
The Minister for that report. The day after the publication of the interim report, the group's chair, Dr Alison Elliott, addressed the Scottish Land and Estates AGM, the Lairds. Professor Jim Hunter says Scotland retains, and I quote, the most concentrated, most inequitable, most unreformed and most undemocratic land ownership system in the entire developed world. whilst the land and estates tell us they, I quote, remain disappointed at the persisting view that the pattern of land ownership in Scotland is unfair and unjust. When tenant farmers still have no right to buy and are reluctant to speak out for fear of repercussions from those very layers I referred to, what can the Scottish Government do quickly to show the country that it hasn't abandoned its historical campaigning zeal on another important issue?
Minister. Microphone for the Minister, please.
I can try and shout if you like. I can hopefully reassure the member that in the course of today's debate that we'll set out more clearly what our intentions are in terms of the ongoing work of the Land Reform Review Group and our continued ambition for a bold and radical land reform. But specifically, the Land Reform Review Group have made a number of recommendations about trying to rectify some of the difficulties we face with the existing community right to buy provisions, which I'm sure the members are aware do not operate fully satisfactorily in many cases. And indeed, we are also looking to extend through the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill provisions in respect of urban right to buy. But I'll hopefully provide more detail for the member later on today.
Thank you. Rob Gibson, supplementary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Government could confirm that my constituents, who contain many frustrated hereditary tenant farmers, many crofting communities, will be able to see housing land, new start farms, Croft benefiting from the Land Reform Review Group that's underway in the final phase, which comes round next spring, because they want to see many more people being able to live in our land today, and that seems to be the best route forward for it.
Paul Wheelhouse.
Well, I certainly share the member's concern that we need to be able to demonstrate to communities that land reform, the land reform agenda will help deliver their economic aspirations, their social aspirations, and indeed help sustain some of the most fragile communities we have in Scotland. Clearly, land is a critical part of that in terms of enabling people to have the assets that they can use to further the needs of their community. As I say, I hope I will set out with some degree of clarity our sense of direction on this afternoon.
Claire Baker.
Does the Minister agree with Jim Hunter that the Government should be directly involved in the work of the group, and will he consider increasing the number of members of the group, which is currently 3, to increase the numbers to address the concerns there is currently a lack of expertise available in the group to address some of the most complex issues?
Minister.
Well, clearly, phase 2 of the review will involve a lot of work, detailed work, taking forward in much greater depth the issues that have been covered in phase 1, and in respect of our commitment in terms of resourcing the group, we do commit to resource the group to be able to provide the advice that we seek on these areas. I will set out in more detail exactly what we're doing in response to the immediate work programme of the Land Reform Review Group later on this afternoon. I hope that will satisfy the member at that time.
Thank you very much. Question 6 has been withdrawn and an explanation has been provided. Question 7, Nigel Dunn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the UK Government on repatriating red meat levy income.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
I most recently raised this issue with the UK Government Secretary of State at a ministerial meeting on the 20th of May, when I once again set out the case for repatriation of over £1.4 million per year of red meat levy income. Despite wide support from many sections in Scottish agriculture, the UK Government continue to ignore our well-reasoned case, and instead they want to protect the interests of their own red meat sector at Scotland's expense. However, I will continue to press Scotland's case and seek a resolution to this long-running injustice.
Nigel Dunn.
Thank you, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response, though not, of course, the content of it. Scotland can rightly claim to have the best red meat production in the world. However, the shortchanging of this country by the UK Government does plainly reduce the marketing opportunities for that fine product. Does the Cabinet Secretary see any short-term resolution of this impasse?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of short-term. I would recommend all livestock producers in Scotland vote yes in next year's referendum, and that perhaps will provide the quickest solution to this issue. All levy raised in Scotland thereafter would stay in Scotland, which is the outcome that all livestock producers, I believe, in this country want to see. In the meantime, of course, UK ministers, I understand, are attending the Royal Highland Show later this month. I would urge them to bring with them to the show some good news for Scotland's livestock producers, to recognise the very strong case put by our livestock producers that when an animal is born and reared in this country, The levy paid in that animal should promote Scottish produce, not produce from other parts of the UK. That would be the only fair and reasonable solution to this dispute. And I do hope when the ministers do attend the show later this month, they'll bring that good news that they're recognising the case and that levy raised in Scotland will stay in Scotland.
Thank you. Question 8, John Penland.
To ask the Scottish Government when it will publish its final second report on proposals and policies.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
The precise timetable for publication has not yet been confirmed, but it is our aim to lay the final report prior to the summer recess, providing a suitable parliamentary slot can be found.
John Pentland.
Can I thank the Minister for that reply, but what the industry, NGOs and the public would like to know is, will the final version move from the wishful thinking of proposals to a proper plan based on policies, adequate funding, appropriate timescales for action, and incentives to achieve the transformational change, particularly in housing and transport sectors, that was identified by the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee?
Minister.
Well, I recognise the concern that has been expressed by stakeholders in terms of the point that John Pentland makes regarding residential sector and transport. We don't have specific sector targets, as the member no doubt is aware, in terms of the RPP2 as it's currently structured, and there's no requirement in statute for us to do that. However, we do have try and address particular themes across the RPP2. All sectors of the economy are being expected to make a contribution. Clearly, the government is keen to ensure that across areas like sustainable travel and transport, that we do as much as we possibly can. And I know Keith Brown, my colleague Minister for Transport, has been having discussions with groups in respect of cycling and other areas to try and take forward our plans for low-carbon transport. But I hope when the document is published, Mr Pentland will be happy that we have set out and improved the clarity of the document, which I know was a concern that many had, and we'll do as much as we can to indicate with great degree of confidence that the trajectory that we're on is a good one.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I ask the Minister further about the RPP, the extent to which it will be possible to identify streams of work that will need to be done for research in order to take forward policies for the future that are related to the challenges that we all face in relation to climate change?
Minister.
Well, I certainly recognise that it's an important issue, particularly as I think we discussed at committee some of the areas of technical potential where, in specific respect of land use, we discussed at committee the point regarding peatlands and our expectations that the peatland plan will help inform our understanding of exactly how far and fast we can achieve what is currently a proposal in the RPP2 to deliver 21,000 hectares of peatland per annum. So that's just one example, but I do take the point that the member raises, and we'll look to see what we can do to give confidence in that.
Many thanks. Question 9, Fiona MacLeod.
To ask the Scottish Government what mechanisms are available to the Forestry Commission Scotland for the support of social enterprises.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
In addition to providing advice on forestry-related matters, Forestry Commission Scotland is able to support social enterprises that contribute to the implementation of the Scottish Forestry Strategy through its Forestry Development Programme, also through the delivery of programmes of the National Forest Estate, and of course through the sale or lease of land to communities under the National Forest Land Scheme.
Fiona Hislop. Fiona MacLeod. Forgive me.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. It's really interesting, and I wonder if he could give me more detailed information, perhaps in writing, to help my constituents in Lennoxtown, led by the redoubtable Susan Murray, who are looking to develop Lennox Forest, but particularly looking at an apart hotel run as a social enterprise to go along with the cycling developments they're looking at.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I say, the Forestry Commission is always keen to help social enterprises who want to promote health and wellbeing and community benefits. And if the member feels that the project, which sounds very interesting in our own constituency, and I'd be keen to learn more about it, fits the bill, I'm sure we can send not only the member details, but set up a meeting between Forestry Commission Scotland and the representatives of the project that the member refers to.
Thank you. Question 10, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it plans to take to control the population of grey-lag geese in the Uist.
Mr Paul Wheelhouse.
The Scottish Government and Scottish Natural Heritage support crofters and farmers on the Uist in minimising the impact of grey-lag geese through a number of schemes and initiatives, as well as direct practical assistance. This includes the introduction of a pilot project on the Uist to develop adaptive management methods for the control of resident grey-lag geese, supported by £37,000 worth of funding over 3 years. Scottish Natural Heritage are also examining ways in which they can use powers available to them to permit the limited sale under licence of wild goose carcasses arising from these pilots. In these ways, we're seeking to achieve a balance between our conservation obligations and the needs of sustainable agriculture.
Rhoda Grant.
I thank the Minister for that answer. He'll be aware that numbers are extremely large, and for shooting to impact it would need to be carried out on a professional basis. Has he given any consideration to any other means that might hamper breeding and control numbers that way?
Minister.
Well, certainly we are, through the National Goose Management Group, trying to identify ways in which we can be as effective as possible in managing pressure points where there are these balances have to be struck between conservation and the needs of agriculture. I'd certainly be interested in any ideas that Rhoda Grant has in respect of measures that, based on local knowledge, may work in the US. However, we are trying to work with our stakeholders, including RSPB and others, to try and identify, where possible, non-lethal methods to control numbers. But unfortunately, in some cases, it has had to involve adaptive management, and that's the approach we're taking in the US at this stage.
Many thanks. And that